Well, last time, which was about 7-8 weeks ago, that I spoke in front of you, we talked on renewing of the mind. We looked at how the mind is enmity with God. There's a battle. We also talked about how a renewed mind looks. We saw how when a renewed mind looked at a basket of bread and fish, it saw 12 baskets left over. We saw how a renewed mind looked at a sea with waves as high as a man, looked peaceful. We saw how 12 spies could leave the camp and go into the promised land, and 10 could come back and see giants, terror, castles, and 2 could see the enemy is already defeated. Today I'm going to carry on with that theme a little bit, kind of do the other side of the coin. I want to speak on dying to yourself. Because it's always pretty neat when God moves for you. You know, the time we got saved and the mercy of the Lord came upon us, we could feel that, and we felt the freedom. And then the grace of God moved in, and we could feel the glory. And for some in the Christian life, that's where it stops. We promise to give God our heart, but we hold back on our life. We can give Him our heart and not give Him our will. We can take and give Him our heart, pray for miracles, see miracles. We can rebuke the devil and see the devil flee. Which are all amazing and super wonderful. But you see what we got here? We got a one-sided relationship. This is what God's doing for me. We got to surrender our hearts. We can feel all warm and mushy. But in a true relationship, both parties get something out of it. We call Him Lord. And we don't even consider what the word Lord is supposed to be insinuating. And I always look back to the old knights and kings and queens, King Arthur days, and look at the word Lord there, and how in lordship, they would go to the peasants of the land, and the peasants would farm their land, and they'd get, a sharecropping total, and the Lord would get the bulk of it. It was His land, His fruit, His seed. And he'd say one day to the servants, he'd say, "Go plant seed." They'd say, "Yes, sir." He'd say, "Go harvest seed. Go harvest crop." They'd say, "Yes, sir." He'd say, "Go work on the equipment." They'd say, "Yes, sir." When we call Him Lord, the idea is that we are surrendering everything to Him. He's boss. He's king. However you want to put it. Jesus says in Matthew 16:24, "And when man will come after me, let him deny himself." I put in parentheses his life. When a man comes after me, Jesus says, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. It doesn't even say let him deny Satan. Doesn't say deny the devil. He wants you to deny yourself, the privileges that you think you've earned, the rights. See, God's never paid much attention to the devil. Man pays way too much attention. Well, we pick up our cross and we follow him. And I was thinking about this. For a cross to work, it's going to have to be taller than me, right? Because it's got to be buried in the ground. It's got to be above my head. It's got to cross. It's really an awkward deal. To carry a cross, it's going to take 2 arms and a strong shoulder. Then on the other hand, if you want to carry a fence around, it's going to take 2 arms and maybe a hip to drag it. It dawned on me, you can't carry a cross and a fence at the same time. You have no right to carry an offense. You have no right to hold something against the brethren. Pick up your cross and follow me. See, when I read the New Testament, I realize this gospel wasn't written to tell me about the darkness. It was written to tell me who I was to be. It was written to free me from myself. My preconceived ideas, my thoughts, where I think I should be going, where I ought to be. To understand, when we came to Jesus, what's your reality? My reality is, when I came to Jesus, I died. That's my reality. I died so that he could live within me. It says in 2 Corinthians 5:14, 15, that one died for all, that we're all dead, and that he dies for all, that they which live should not henceforth live unto themselves, but unto him which died for them. I call it a life of surrender. I surrender my will. I surrender my desires, my rights, my will deserves. I don't have choices that I need to make. My choice is, am I going to get down on my knees and find out, God, what do you want me to do? I'm 64. God, do you want me to start thinking about retiring? I could retire. It could be my choice. God gives us free will. He loves us. We can look for a new job. I know of a guy who works at a department store. I thought I'd do him a favor. I offered him a job. Not only did it pay a little bit more, I'm sure, but you never knew where it could land. It could take you anywhere. He turned me down. This is where the Lord wants me. I think, what about the prosperity message? I could have made you more money. What about the freedom? Where do you want to go? But his life focus isn't on his money. It's on souls. Not on souls of people already in church, but souls that are out of church. And it just blesses my heart when we think this. And we think, we have the rights for this, maybe I'll move to another city. I don't like this city. Maybe I get a different job because these people are mean at my job. Maybe the pastor offended me. Maybe that substitute guy that they let talk every now and then when the pastor's out of town, maybe he offends me. Maybe somebody didn't tell me hi maybe somebody act like they didn't care. I think I'll go get another church. And we church hop. Never taken into consideration, God, where do you want me? I'll tell you my story. So I belonged to a church. The church was dividing and splitting and going different directions. I'd been reawakened in the Lord and I could hear His voice. And I said, God, can I move on? Can I go to another church? You know what He told me? Yep. So I made plans. Talked to a guy and this and that, and I was planning on moving. And I'm one of these guys that gets real excited about anything. I could wear a new suit and get excited. I could start working on a new house tomorrow, and I'd be excited the night before. I'm just one of these excitable guys. And I didn't feel any excitement. I said, Lord, why don't I feel excitement? It was a whole week had gone by. It was Friday. Sunday was the day. I said, Lord, why don't I feel excitement? You know what He said? He said, you asked me the wrong question. You asked me, can I go? And I love you. I said, yes. You should have asked, should I go? I need you to stay. Now He's talking to a guy that's never preached a word in his life, has no ability to lead or be part of a worship team, doesn't sit in the pew and prophesy, hadn't anyway, and he's telling me I asked the wrong question. Should I go? Was the right one? And he said no. Two different answers. How many Christians are open to questioning God when they don't feel that God is in it? Or do we stubbornly say, thank you, God, for giving me a free will. I get to do whatever I want as long as I don't sin. You know, I was sitting about where Daryl's at one meeting about 5 years ago. Pastor Tom was here then. And I was just worshiping. Not asking the Lord to speak to me. Just having me a time. And I heard the Lord speak to me. He said, your name's not Mike anymore. And that floored me. I didn't know what that meant. And I was like, what? He says, you're not Mike Kautz anymore. He died. And I understood in a small way, and I went to Pastor Tom. I said, I don't know what this means. Am I supposed to get a new name? I went and mentioned it to my wife, and I had a real good friend, and I mentioned to him, and they all was like, I don't know what that means. And I mentioned a guy in Jacksonville that I knew, and he gave me this long thing where we all get new names and this and that, when it was really very simple. It took me a couple years to understand that God liked what he was seeing. That he was seeing a man that was emptying himself of himself and trying to achieve in his life all of God's dreams he had about him. You know, I even remember, as many of you know, my first wife passed away. And 3 days after I became a widower, I had a dream. I was going to marry a gal that I didn't know. That I knew her, but didn't know her. Don't think we ever had a real conversation together. Knew her ex-husband better. She went to church. She was a good gal. We knew each other by reputation and stuff. I could have, and God would have honored me. Said, I don't know her. I ain't going to do it. Can I tell you this? That was the most amazing, smartest thing I ever did when I said yes to him. I ended up marrying a gal that's beyond words, the most amazing person I've ever met, who cares for my very soul, because I let God direct my paths. I didn't go with what my rights were. I didn't even go with courtship. Okay, well, Lord, I'm going to check her out. I'll date her for 6 months. I took her out on one date. We were married a week after that. I love you, hon. Galatians 2:20 says, I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ lives within me. When we're dead, we don't have any rights. A little political joke, I guess, I'll say, but only the Democrat Party recipients have the right to vote after they die. Independents, Republicans don't have that right. We don't have the right to choose our destiny. We already chose it. I'd rather die and live with Christ than live the way I'm going. We don't even fear death, because it says in the Word that it's been given once to a man to die. I'll look at that and say, in any situation, what's the worst that could happen to me? I can't die again. I'm already dead. When people come and they say, we have this right, this is the way it should be, we believe this, and there's okay to have knowledge and understandings of how things ought to be. But what I'm saying, when you get militaristic about it, it's the old flesh. It's refusing to die. Now we know that the old man died when we got saved. We're still battling with the renewing of the mind, where the mind is the one that tells you who you are, what you deserve, and where you ought to be. And it's at enmity with God. You know, I wanted to bring a doll, a little children's doll. And turned out we don't have one at the house anymore. So let me explain it the best I can. So somebody's going to make a doll, and they envision what this image of the doll should be. And maybe they'll write it down. I want cherry cheeks. I'm going to do blue eyes. I believe this doll should have toenail polish on. And you get this vision, this image of what this doll is going to be. And then you create this doll. And I'll tell you this. When I hear myself saying, I this, I that, I'm creating an image of myself. I believe I have this right. I think this person is dead wrong. And I keep hearing I. I'm creating an image of myself. And what I'm really doing is I can take that image and make it into a doll. And you know what this doll would be called? An idol. An idol. Because it's not about me. It's about the blood of the Lamb. It's about the cross. How great its work was done in our life. We can claim for justice, and yes, there ought to be justice. And we can say, I believe, that we ought to have freedom of speech. It's one of our rights. And it is right now. But what are you going to do if that right's taken away? Will you become less of who you are? We're here to serve at the king's pleasure. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the book of the Esther that I've never heard it talked about before. But I think she's a great example of what I'm trying to say. Esther's a book where she had to make decisions where nothing made sense. And still she obeyed. As we know in Esther 1, the king decided to have a party. It was a 7-day feast, a drunken feast. He had all of his buddies. He had the rich and he had the poor. Well, here it says, when the days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were presented in Shushan, the palace, both great and small. 7 days, the court of the garden of the king's palace. In verse 10, it says, on the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he was drunk into a stupor, but he'd also been partying for 7 days, so he's getting bored. He's worried about entertaining his guests, which were multitudes. So he declared to bring Vashti, the queen, before the king with the crown royal, to show the people the princess's her beauty. For she was fair to look at, but she refused. Now, I've heard people preach on Vashti before, and they showed her as a disobedient wife. In fact, that's what they were worried about, as you read later on, where the text talks about, we got to punish her because what if all our wives became disobedient? But I don't read it that way. I read it about a king who was drunk, who had his buddies drunk. They'd done all kinds of things for 6 days. 7th day, winding down. They were in a stupor. We need some excitement. Let's bring this beautiful gal out. Let's parade her before drunken men who will make lewd, lascivious comments. Let her have her dressed in skimpy clothing so all can see how beautiful she was. And in her modesty and in her integrity, she said, I ain't going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And so we know that Esther then was removed from being queen. Because she wouldn't show off her body. She wouldn't let a bunch of drunks make comments about her and who knows what else, as she had to move through their midst. To me, she was an amazing woman. She's kind of like what I'd like to have for a sister, a cousin, a lady of integrity. So she was banished. Now in Esther 2:2, it says, the king's servant said, the minister on him, let there be fair young virgins, multiple, sought for the king. Let us have a contest of beautiful women, only way I can say it is, who would participate in one-night stands to see who would become king. So Esther, she was gathered up in this group, and she had decisions to make. I'm assuming she could have got out of it. Mordecai could have done something. She could have done something, but she had decisions to make. First of all, she had to give 1 year of her life of doing nothing because she had to go through a purification ritual. Her life stops. She had to realize that if I don't win this contest, I never get to go back home. That wasn't the tradition. The tradition was you went to the concubine palace and there you stayed for the rest of your life. which means I would never get to marry. I wouldn't have children. I wouldn't have the freedom to travel. And what happened to Vashti could happen to me. Everything says, no, 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 no way, Jose. There's no logical sense to participate in this. We're not talking like, hey, there was 3 versions, so I got one chance in 3. Tradition says that there could have been 100 or hundreds. So the chances of winning this contest, which if you read the rest of Esther, you get a feel for her personality. She wasn't a contest type person anyway. She wasn't a competitive type person. She was very careful in all things. But she did. And she went through this year of purification. She said yes. Now, in case anybody isn't familiar with him, maybe they're thinking, well, yeah, but she did it to save the Jews. Haman had not yet been elevated in his authority at this time. He had not yet had the power to come across the Jews. This was God seeing into the future. The most popular verse, you could say, that's quoted the most often out of Esther is this. It's 4:4. Who knows whether thou art come to the kingdom for a time like this? So I'm saying to that person that turned me down for a job, who knows? Maybe for the time, for the kingdom, for the future. For one soul, God will leave you here. Who knows if you're told to move to Nashville, Tennessee, what God's got planned for you? Who knows if you're asked to stay, what God has planned for you? This I do know. If we don't ask, if our heart is set that we don't want to know, we can't be used. And though our life looks very important here on this earth, big picture, not important at all. Yeah, I got a job. We make a certain amount of money. I get people call me, email me all the time. Can you do this? Can you do that? I look important. I got a great bunch of kids that God raised. We lose fact that this is a temporary living space. Just temporary housing. But the big picture is your heavenly realm. But you got to have heaven inside of you here on earth to really enjoy heaven. Today's a good day to start living a heavenly living. Today's a good day. See, men for years have had the faith to get saved, but they haven't had the faith to get heaven within inside them. God is amazing. God's love for us is amazing. But let it not be misunderstood. God's looking for a return. We're going to go and we're going to walk those hallowed streets someday, but you realize there's some that are going to go to the throne room and he's going to say, I don't know you. And he said, yeah, but I did healings. I prophesied. I said, I never knew you. What's that mean to you? We need to slow down and consider these verses. What's that mean? I thought if I prophesied, it didn't say he falsely prophesied. I thought if we did healings, and it does say in the word that a house divided cannot stand, so the healing wasn't of Satan, but it was of God. What does it mean when he says, I never knew you? It means you didn't die for him. He gave his life for you. He didn't give him anything. You know, people in the Old Testament, they used to sacrifice animals and this and that, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically it says, you know, I don't desire those sacrifices. The sacrifice I desire is a body. What's that mean to us? That he desires a body. We died so he could live within us. Is he controlling us? Are you willing to let God place you somewhere that you believe is below your station in life? Are you willing to shut down your business and do something else? Are you willing to go to Africa to preach? Are you willing to go to Georgia to preach? Are you willing to preach? Are you willing to share? Are you willing to go after lost souls? I look at it this way many times, and I think I've said this before, but I look at some of the requirements of the Word. And if I were to give them a money value, because it's a good way to think about it in a sense, did I go after any lost souls? I get $5. Did I do anything in Mark 15? Did I pray for the sick? I get $5. Because really now, remember now, I'm thinking, what are we giving to God that he would pay us for? And he's not going to pay you a dime. But what my question always to myself is, as I go through this list, did I do this? Did I do that? At the end of the week, because of the society we live in where money's important, the question is, would I get paid this week? Did I do anything for the kingdom, led by the Spirit in any way that I didn't plan on doing? Did I decide to go check this job site out when I didn't need to, and all of a sudden there's a connection there? Did I do anything that God told me to so that I would get a paycheck this week? If the answer is no, it's a pretty one-sided relationship. You woke up every morning, you breathed the air, you ate the food, and all your body, your liver, your kidneys, your heart all worked, your lungs were breathing air in and out, nobody told it to. What did you do for God? And I don't mean to go into works. You know, I look at, there's works, you can do works without love, but you can't do love without works. And you could walk a little old lady across the street, and something amazing could happen to you. And you know, God just blessed me because I listened to his voice and walked that little old lady across the street. And that's the work of God. If you stand at that street corner and you walk the next 10 little old ladies across the street, that's the work of yourself. It's all about hearing the voice of the Lord and saying yes. Will I say yes? Do I have the understanding that things don't always look good? Things don't always look like they're right. They don't even look like they're of God, really, sometimes. We're talking about Esther again. What she did not look like God participating in that beauty pageant. And without her, thousands and thousands of Jews would have been slaughtered. You got Ananias, barely saved, couple year Christian. He gets the biggest threat to all Christians coming to his door. Told in advance, good time to run. And he thought about it. Good time to say, God, this don't make sense. And he did. Then what did he do? He bowed his head and said, okay, I'll do it. You got Absalom. Never did figure it out. A child of the king, just like you guys. Had everything at his disposal. He had thought he had the right to kill a man because the man abused his sister. And he plotted. And he did it. And then he ran off to his father-in-law's house. Or it'd be his grandpa's house, his mother's father, and King of Gersha. Waited to be called back because I'm royalty. Got called back. Still didn't get what he deserved. I'm the king's son. I deserve an audience with the king. I ought to be right up there making decisions. So we know the story. You know, he contacted Joab, and Joab got him before the king, and Absalom got what he wanted again. Now sometimes when we get what we want, our mind says our life's going to get better, and we're going to see, you know, we're blessed. So Absalom, he looked around, and he started standing outside the king's gate for everybody that had a trouble. And he'd hear their troubles, and he'd say, oh, if only there was a judge to hear your problem, I would judge fairly. Can I tell you from the days of Moses, when his father-in-law came and helped him set up the system, there were judges to judge those problems already? But Absalom thought he had certain rights. He thought he had certain things figured out better than other people did. You know, he went so far as, Absalom had 3 boys and 1 daughter for kids. But in a later chapter, he says, because he had nobody to pass his heritage on to, he built himself a statue. He thought he was so beautiful that once a year he'd make a big program out of pulling his hair. Can you imagine that? Hey, everybody, it's been a year. I'm going to cut my hair. Come and watch. See, royalty in the family does not mean you're giving anything to the family. You can be a taker and not a giver. So eventually Absalom, he knew what was best. He conceived a way to take the kingdom from David. Because in his eyes, he'd be better off. What am I saying? I'm saying if you say I too much, I this, I that, you're imitating Absalom. And we know the end of Absalom was death. But I think the point was already made. Sometimes we do things that we don't understand by the word of the Lord. So God wants to move you guys around. He wants to position you in ways for future future history, for a future event. And I know that I'm 64. Some of you are a little older than me, some of you a little younger than me, and some way younger than me. But I say I'm 64 because a lot of people say, well, that's it, I'm done. This is my wind down period. This isn't nobody's wind down period. Every one of you will confess that God doesn't know time, and then you're keeping time on yourself. I'm 66. I can't go to Malaysia to preach. I can't go to Ellisville and share the gospel. I've done mine. I'm not going after lost souls anymore. If God leads one to my door and knocks, I'll answer. I'm not going to go searching. I'm not going to go finding. When God says seek and find. God's going to would like to put you in a position where you don't know what's going on next in your life. In fact, let me say this. If you understand everything going on in your life, you have an inferior Christian life. Let me say it a different way. Because we were people who believe in revelation. You'll always have increased mystery with increased revelation. Because this life is called a life of faith. Nowhere does it say this is a life of understanding. Yes, God will show you all things when He's getting ready in His time. And you'll say, see, this is why I had you marry this woman. This is why. I know back in 2006, I run a painting company, and we were the most successful painting company in the county. We basically did only new residential. We were doing about 300 a year. Some years I felt like I was making more money than I could stand. 2006, the Lord spoke to me something that didn't make a bit of sense. He says, you need to get into commercial work. First of all, if you get into commercial work, got to get out of residential work because you really have a tough time finding laborers that can do what you need done. You can't even find laborers that do things you don't need done. And I fought the thing. I put it aside, and it just kept coming back like an itch. Finally, I walked into my son's room, his office. I said, guys, we got to get into commercial work. God won't let me alone. Towards the end of 2007, I believe I'm right in the timing, the Great Recession hit, the worst economy since the Depression. 2009, we did 3 brand new houses. Can I say that when I decided that we got to go into commercial work, it didn't make sense? That I was already making what I considered more than I deserved. But in 2009, we paid every single bill. We gave out bonuses. We bought a couple new trucks, new scissor lifts, paid for them up front. That would not have been possible on 3 new houses in a year. Sometimes God starts placing you, and I'm going to say oftentimes God starts placing you today where you need to be in 3 years. Are you willing to listen to that nudge? Are you willing to go back and say, I might have missed it. What was that again, God? Are you willing? Because it's your salvation. That was really because I'm a family-owned business, that was the salvation for 5 families. Financially salvation. Where everyone made every one of their rent payments. Everybody had groceries. But it didn't make sense. And my heart's crying out to you, folks. God's got plans for us. Sometimes we need to ask. And sometimes He'll just tell us without asking. But I'll tell you what, it's so easy to ignore the answer if it's not what lines up with what you wanted it to be. But everything God does, every gift of His is good and perfect. And the biggest gift He gives is knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. You know, I find it interesting, that there's things when you're born again, there's certain things that automatically happen in your life. There's certain things that you have to access in your life, and there's at least one thing you have to go after. Now, when you're born again, you're automatically given a new nature. The old man is dead, done, buried, gone. And you have the nature of Christ. You have a better understanding of right and wrong than you've ever had before. When you're born again, all the fruits of the Spirit, all the gifts of the Spirit, all the attitudes of the Beatitudes are buried in your loins. It's your job to allow them to come forth, to access them, to go after them. And then once they're there, like if you've been angry for, I'll tell you this, peace is here. And you're going to access it, and you're going to bring it forth. And then it's your job to protect that peace. But the renewed mind is different. Yeah, you're given the mind of Christ. Even Paul says that to the Corinthians, who he also called very carnal. But the renewed mind, you have to go after. You have to purpose in your life. This is mine. I'm going to get this. I'm going after it. I'm going to learn. I'm going to dig into this Word of God, which is the written history of things that God has said. I'm going to dig into my prayer life. I'm going to let the Holy Ghost roll over me, but you have to purpose to go after the renewed mind. See, the mind is different than any other thing. The mind was created, I know we're all forget things, so it's hard to say this, but the mind was created to not delete anything. It's built a lot like a computer. You see, if you got born again and the mind became totally new, honestly, you'd have to learn how to walk again. You'd have to learn how to talk again. So you don't have that ability because God wants you to hit the deck running. You got to know how to run. But the mind is a lot like a computer. You know, in a computer, you can never truly delete anything. A forensics computer guy can go back and find it. What a computer does is it puts this other thing over the top of what you've already learned. Basically, the way my son says it, basically says, puts over the top, this area is blank. And you can, like he says, with his Linux system, he can go to any computer and go underneath that and figure out what you deleted. Because it's still there. And that's the way the mind is. You've got to learn over the top of what you already know. You've got to learn that as you were a kid, you learned you couldn't walk on water. Now you got to learn over the top. It's possible. Maybe even probable in the future in certain situations. You learn that this small amount of food, that's it. Everybody gets a meager portion. We got to share it. I was raised in a family of 5, and we shared 1 chicken, 3 potatoes. That was our meal. Well, 7 because of my parents, 5 kids. I mean, we had small portions. It's no wonder I graduated from high school at 120 pounds. But that's the way our mind works, right? Now we look at that basket, see 7 loaves, 3 little fishes, say, man, there's enough food here to feed thousands. In fact, this basket of food looks like 12 baskets of leftovers. We're learning things over the top, just like the computer puts a blank spot over the top, and then you add new information over top. Okay, now I want to, I'm going to do this invoicing over this, what I deleted here and there. Whatever you're doing, you're going over the top of what you've got. You're filling in over the top. You're writing over the top of what you know. This stuff is blank. It's no good to me anymore. I'm not the same person I was. And now you're typing over the top. God is true. God loves me. I'm a child of the King. I have an inheritance. All things are mine. Jesus said to the Jews, which believed on him, this is John 8:31, if you continue in my word, these were believers he's talking to, if you continue in my word, then are you my disciples? Indeed. You are my disciples for sure, positively, ain't no question about it. If you continue in what I'm asking you to do. If you continue in the knowledge of who I'm telling you who you really are. Because really, when we understand who we are in God, our original destiny, what He really created man to be in the beginning, and we understand total restoration, everything He tells us about ourselves just makes sense. And everything He tells us to beware of, it just makes sense. Every direction He tells you to go, you're like, well, of course, indeed, for sure, positively. Because you've died to yourself. You're continuing in His Word. And it says, that God's a rewarder of them that seek Him. Man, you mean not only do I get what I've already got, but I get rewarded above that? Above and beyond? Who knows what tomorrow will look like? So really, I want to impress so much. Let God be in charge. And I know, it's, I was with a group of people 40 years ago, and they'd pray about if I should go to this restaurant and that restaurant. And I'm not asking you to do that. But I am saying there's a way, there's a life when you say, let's go to Carrabba's. And all of a sudden you get this urge. You know what? Let's go Chewy's instead. Be aware of that. Be aware of his leanings. And be aware of his direct out and out suggestions. When you love Jesus with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, every suggestion he makes, and that's what he's doing. He says, you could. My heart takes this as a commandment. God, you said I could, but there ain't no question about it. I am going to. Not I could, I should. I should. So I'm just going to wind down with one little last thought. Because it's a rewarder we're seeking. It's a good God we're seeking. We trust him. He'll do us no harm. He won't make a mistake. So I'm going to read from Proverbs 3:19 and 20, and then I'm going to tell you my interpretation of it. The Lord by wisdom has founded the earth. By understanding has he established the heavens. By his knowledge, the depths are broken up, and the clouds drop down dew. My renewed mind says it's like this. Your renewed mind says it's like this. We have a creative capability. Because he said he founded the earth by wisdom. That wisdom's within us. We have a creative capability. We have divine knowledge. We have supernatural ingenuities. Now I know in my business, we've done some things 30 years ago that nobody else did. And virtually everybody in this community does now. I know when I worked for Brother Dale Nicholson, he was always looking for that ingenuity. There's got to be a better way. This rests within each and every one of you. I know talking to Brother Steve Wheeler, there's been certain nuts and bolts that he just couldn't get to, and he gets this divine ingenuity idea of, I can do it by doing this. I know that happens at the Camp Myers S&S mowers. I know it happens at Hub. I know it happens with Roger and his electrical. We have the supernatural ingenuity of the Almighty to be infused in every single observation, to be infused in every single thought. And this is the one we've been talking about. This divine knowledge, this supernatural ingenuity is infused in every single decision that we make. The word says, behold, all things are become new, and all things are of God to those reconciled to him. That's 1 Corinthians 5:17 and 18. That's my parting thought. You guys are new. All things became new. All things are of God to those reconciled to him. So you do, for sure, absolutely, indeed, positively, have residing in you the ability to say no to yourself and yes to God. And when you say yes to God, it activates this creative capability we said. This divine knowledge comes from God. This supernatural ingenuity of the Almighty. And it's going to change lives. If we'll let it change lives, it'll change destinies. It'll change our future history. It's who's going to be willing to pay the price. And he's not asking anybody to shed blood. Not asking you to do what he did. He's looking for a two-way relationship. He's for you guys all the time, in every way. And whether or not you die unto him and give him your will completely, he's still for you. But life, relationship is amazing. Get all you can out of it. You're going to reap what you sow. And can I say sowing is a decision? Annette, can we have that last song that we talked about? So I just want to thank y'all. I hope you all understood my heart. My heart is, let's go forward. We could look 10 years from now, we could look back and see exactly where we are today. My hope is that we become more active. Too many times in Christian life, it's all about learning revelation. I want to learn something about God, but we don't do anything with it. We're wasted. We're vessels with holes in them if we do that. And I just, my heart is for the lost. Because somebody one time took mercy on me and went out of their way to share with me. And I want God to know that I still remember. It still means a lot to me. And God, I do want to get paid. And I know I will be paid. Because I'm going to do the work.